Welcome to Risk Matters on the Road. This first podcast was shot in Washington, D.C. A very special thanks to our guest, Gene Ludwig, for appearing on Risk Matters from his office, one block from the White House. Gene has a very rich track record in the areas of banking, technology, entrepreneurship, and social contribution, serving as Managing Partner of Canopy, CEO of Ludwig Advisors, Chairman of the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, founder of the Promontory family of companies, author of The Vanishing American Dream, and former controller of the currency. Part 2 of the podcast is about income inequality.
Gene, you're also the chairman of the Ludwig Institute for Shared Economic Prosperity, and you've written a lot about the inequalities that exist within American society, but of course these inequalities also exist in other countries. I guess you focus mainly on what you see as the real numbers of inflation, of unemployment. Why are your numbers always a lot worse, I should say, than the official numbers of the government?
Well, here's how this all started. It seemed to me, from my own observation, just living back about 5-6 years ago, that middle and low income Americans were not doing as well as the numbers suggested, and we're not, doing, marvelously well in an environment where GDP was growing dramatically. So I held a symposium at the Yale Law School, and it was a symposium that lasted a day and a half and included economists, a couple Nobel Prize winners, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, former Governor Deval Patrick, mayors, business people, and activists, and tried to incorporate as many different points of view as possible. And this day and a half symposium was divided into 3 parts. First, am I right to worry? Are things as bad for middle and low income Americans as it feels to me they are? And I'll explain why it felt that way to me. That's number one. Number two, what should we do about it on a national basis? And number 3, what should you do about it on a local basis? Because actually it's different. Dealing with it in a city context or a town or a rural area there are different tools one would use than national policy. What was interesting was the first segment, which is it as bad as I think it is, and is it getting worse? The reason I felt that way, that should be something we focus on, was first, there were a number of books coming out that were suggesting that. The vice president's book, which is a seminal book, the current vice president's seminal book, The Hillbilly Elegy. Yep. And there were a whole bunch of other books, Belle Sawhill's book, she's a scholar at the Brookings Institute, that suggested this. Furthermore, I grew up in a small town outside of Washington, about 100 miles away, and I've watched the town deteriorate some. And third, here in Washington, D.C., all you have to do is go to the Federal Reserve, beautiful building, beautiful environment. And if you walk past or rode your bicycle past or drove past, which I've done for 40 years, the only thing that's changed is the size of the homeless community. Right. So you say, hey, the statistics may be terrific, but it doesn't feel that way. Now, one of the interesting things about the symposium is while we had all these scholars and everybody agreed that things are not good for middle and low income Americans, are getting worse, nobody had any numbers. I mean, not really comprehensive numbers. So I set about after that symposium to take the economists we had at the Institute, which we referred to in shorthand LISA, and started to look at how can you have these headline statistics that are so terrific? Because if you look at the headline statistics in the United States, you'd think this was the Wizard of Oz, Emerald City. I mean, that everybody, and things are reasonably good compared to the rest of the world. But what we found has been for the last 20 years, we can prove, which I believe it's gone on for the last 40 years, basically since the 1980s, there's been a stagnation at best, and a decline for many in the middle and lower income environment in the United States. while the United States has been growing strongly, it has not improved the well-being of middle and low-income Americans sufficiently. And so what we did was we took apart these headline statistics, why, one by one, and it's an interesting reason why the headline statistics do not reflect the underlying reality. And the reason is the statistics were the whole statistical office that does this, called the Bureau of Labor Statistics, was formulated and set the definitions in the 1930s. And they were based on concepts of the 1890s, because statistical collection of information was something that really came out of actually Massachusetts at the end of the 19th century. Those definitions worked well prior to the 1960s and 70s. They don't work so well now. Much more part-time employment, for example, as opposed to full-time employment. When people tend to get jobs, they tend to get factory jobs, which meant a different thing than getting a job today as, say, an Uber driver. And that definitional weakness, which wasn't a weakness when it started, but weakness as today, has meant that the headline statistics, though not meaningless nor dishonest, but they are not really probative of the environment for middle and low income Americans that exist today.
Some of the numbers are actually quite dramatic. I mean, if I'm correct, you come up with numbers close to 25% of the in terms of the real unemployment, right? I mean, those are sort of Great Depression type figures. So if 1 in 4 Americans is not gainfully employed, if you will, that's a huge problem.
Well, gainfully employed is a little strong. They're not, they are functionally unemployed.
Functionally unemployed, okay.
So here's what we mean. If you take the unemployment figures, 3.7, 4%, they're fantastic numbers. But in those numbers, they count as employed people who may work only an hour or two in the last 2 weeks. They do it in 2-week segments. Somebody who could be really homeless.
Right.
In fact, they count the homeless, work 2 hours.
So someone's homeless, but he's not unemployed.
But not unemployed.
Right.
And we do not count you as employed if you have a part-time job and want a full-time job but can't get it. And we don't count you as fully employed if you cannot earn above a poverty wage. Now, in the United States, the poverty line is very low. So that means you can't earn more than $25,000 a year, which in most parts of the United States means you can't put a nutritious meal on the table for your family or have a roof over your head. So it goes to the homeless. So we don't believe those people really should be counted as employed. We don't think that's what people think of when they think of people being employed. Now, what we believe, and I believe strongly, is a solution to our problem in the United States of the stagnation or decline of middle and low income Americans is to publish, along with the headline statistics, our numbers, because it will focus attention, which now there's as it happens, just luckily for us, there's a huge explosion of interest in what we're doing, within the last month. I mean, just huge explosion since Trump got elected, because actually all of a sudden people are saying, well, why did this happen? Who voted? Why were people unhappy?
Look at the numbers.
Supposedly things are good. And then they kind of say, hey, there's a guy, Ludwig, with this lies thing, and he's been pounding the table and they're not so good.
And he was right.
And that explains that. I think explains the election, why the Democrats lost.
In terms of the future and the advent of AI and falling educational standards and all the things that we just discussed now, what does the sort of social cohesion look like? And are you worried about the future of society and of, the ability of the different social groups to get along, given all these things that are happening at the moment?
Well, the way most people tell the tale and are worried is that AI will take away lots of jobs. We're going to have a lot of unemployed people. We're going to have a lot of people that are going to be supported by something, or they're going to be homeless and poor and whatever. I don't think that's necessarily the case, and let me explain why. Though we will change the way we do things. First, what we found doing this shared economic prosperity looking is that the GDP has been growing so significantly that if the sharing ratio was a little different, not a lot different, rich people could still get richer, and middle and low income Americans could do quite well and could reach the level of what we call the minimum quality of life level, which is go out to dinner, you raise your family, you have a chance the young people go to college, et cetera. So the society is simply wealthy enough to basically allow for that set of opportunities. Now the question then becomes whether artificial intelligence and other technological changes will allow for enough jobs that notwithstanding, the society's ability to pay for them, that there will be what people really want, which is not a hand out, but a hand up.
Right.
Americans want a job, a living wage job. They don't want a handout. That is particularly strong if you do the polling in the United States.
100%.
Now, my own view of this is I'm less pessimistic, probably benighted about the job availability. Let me tell you why. There are a number of tasks in the United States, and I think globally, that really need to be done that are dramatically under peopled. And I don't think that's going to change. Let me give you an example. In schools, in public schools in America, classes sizes roughly 30 to 40 kids per teacher. Well, why not 5 kids per teacher? In other words, there's 10 commandments, but one of the commandments was not there shall be one teacher per 30 kids. Similarly, in hospitals, we're short on nursing staff, for elder care, for child care. There are a lot of jobs that will not be robots, but will be people that we really have under peopled in terms of using people in the United States. And so there's a lot of opportunity to utilize human talent. And furthermore, in the new universe that we're fast going into, where we're going to Mars and who knows what we'll be doing, there will be a lot of other jobs that will require human talents that we haven't even dreamed of yet. So I'm more optimistic that work will be available. We just simply have to use our imagination and some a bit of empathy to reach out and achieve them.